Welcome back everyone, I'm Nick. This is Swiftful Thinking, where we cover all things Swift and SwiftUI related. In the last couple of videos, we were setting up our screens. We created a model, we created a view that can hold a bunch of those models with all of the data, but we do not yet have our coin data. So in this video, we're going to create a class that is going to manage downloading all that data from the internet. And like I mentioned in the introduction, we're using MVVM architecture, but we're actually expanding on traditional MVVM by adding an extra layer between the view model and the database. And we're going to call that basically a service. So our view model is going to reference this data service, and this data service is going to contain all of the logic that is dealing with the database. So it's downloading all the data, decoding all the data, and then returning that data back to the view model. So in this video, we're going to set up our first of a couple data services in this app. And again, if you did not follow the SwiftUI Continued Learning playlist, I highly recommend watching that playlist before this one, because we're going to be downloading with Combine, and we're going to use a whole lot of the features such as background threads and subscribers, a bunch of things that we covered in that playlist. And I did that playlist first on purpose because I do not want you guys to get confused as we jump into this. But by the end of this video, we're going to actually download all of the data, and we should be able to see it on the screen, which is super exciting.
Okay, welcome back everyone. I am back in our Xcode project, of course. And in the last video, we set up our list, which would look cool if we had some data to put in this list other than this one sample Bitcoin. And in this exciting video, finally, we are going to actually download some coins from the internet, put them into this list. So hopefully by the end of this video, the screen looks a little more like this screen, where we have all of these coins that we can see and scroll through. All right, so we're going to download data. And of course, because we're using MVVM, all of that logic is not going to be done in the view. Instead, we're going to start at the view model. So here we have our view model, and we could actually put that logic directly into the view model here. We could add a function down here. Let's say func download data. And then we can add all of our logic for downloading the data, and then we could just append it right to this all coins, and everything would work. But when you are developing these more complex apps, it's usually more efficient to create a separate layer that manages all of the downloading of the data. So this way, the logic for downloading the data is actually separate from the view model. So this view model is going to be specific for the home view. But the downloading the data is actually more generic than this view model, right? So this view model is just for one specific view, but downloading the data, that could be used on a bunch of different screens, a bunch of different views, a bunch of different view models. So instead of adding the logic into the view model, we're going to actually create another class and then reference that class within this view model. So what I'm going to do is, outside of these folders, I'm going to right click and create another new group, and I'm going to call this services. I'm going to move it below the extensions. And the services folder is basically going to be all of the third-party services that we are going to use in our app. So the first service we're going to add is to download the data from CoinGecko. It's going to be our coin data service. But if I were to add other services in my app, like maybe an external database or an analytics service, I would put all of the code for all of those services into this folder. So here I'm going to right click, create a new file, and this will be a Swift file, and I'm going to call it coin data service. Go ahead and click create. All right, and let's create a class. We'll call it coin data service. Open the brackets. And in here, we are going to have an array of coins. So it's going to be an @published var. We'll call this all coins. It'll be of type array of coin model. We'll set it equal to a blank array to start. And the reason we're using the @published in here is because that then makes this a publisher. And if you followed my SwiftUI Continued Learning playlist, we learned that publishers can then have subscribers. So from our view model in a second, we're going to subscribe to this publisher. So anytime this publisher gets updated with data, all of these subscribers are then going to receive that same data. So that's how we're going to get the data from this published array to our view model array. And I'll cover that a little more in detail when we actually get into it. But for this class, when we init the class, we're going to call a function. So let's create a private func. We'll say get coins, open close parentheses, open the brackets. Let's call it from in our init. We'll say get coins. And I made this private because we are only going to access it from within this class. We're never going to call get coins from outside of this class. And now the first thing we need is a URL where we want to download data from. So in our models, in our CoinModel file that we set up earlier, we had copy and pasted this URL here. So I'm just going to copy that, and I'm going to go back into the coin data service, and in this function we're going to say guard let URL equals URL, open the parentheses, string, and this string of course is going to be that URL, and then after this we'll say else return. And just to run through again where this URL is coming from, if I go into CoinGecko, if I go to the CoinGecko website, they have their API here, and we went to the markets API and we added the currency as USD. We wanted the order to be by market cap descending. 250 results per page. We're only going to get the first page right now, and then sparkline we set to true. And we wanted the 24-hour price change. We then clicked execute, and when we ran that, it gave us back the URL that we needed a request from. This is the URL that we have. And then we could see a sample of what the actual response was going to be. And based on this response, we set up our coin models. So this is basically an array of coin models that we're getting back. So this data that we see right here on the screen should be the exact same data that we get when we call our API. And we're about to find out if we did everything right, because if we did everything right, we're going to get all of this awesome data. So going back into the code, we now have our URL, and then we are going to download it using Combine, because Combine is so powerful and it's definitely the future of iOS development. So I highly recommend anyone learning SwiftUI to get comfortable with Combine. We're going to use it, and to do that, we're going to call URL session, and we're just going to use a regular URL session .shared.data task. And we're going to look for the one with a publisher and for URL. Click enter. Of course, we're going to pass in our URL. The first thing we want to do when we subscribe to this publisher is .subscribe on the background thread. So we'll call dispatch queue .global, and the quality of service I'll use .default. Now I believe this is actually going to be default on the background thread anyway. I believe that's what the data task publisher does by default, but it can't hurt to just make sure we are on the background thread here. While we're on the background thread, we then want to try to map the results that we get back from the publisher. So I'm going to call try map, and on this we're going to click enter, and this is going to be the output that we get back, and we want this to return some data, not date. And in here we want to check that we do have good data from the output. So first we'll say guard let response equals output dot response as HTTP URL response. And then we want to make sure that HTTP URL response has a valid status code. So we'll say response dot status code is greater than or equal to 200, and response dot status code is less than 300. Then we'll say else. So if it is not an HTTP URL response or is outside of the 200 range, we are then going to throw an error. And here we'll just call URL error, and I think we can do bad server response. I moved a little quickly through this because I've covered this a bunch of times in the SwiftUI Continued Learning playlist. You can Google URL response status codes, and these are like generic across the internet. Basically, the 200 range means it signals that it is a successful response. So if we can get past this guard here, we can then return the output.data. After we're sure we got this data, let's then return to the main thread. So we'll call .receive on. We'll say dispatch queue.main. We'll then decode it. So we'll call .decode. And we need a type to decode. So we know that the data coming back from this is going to be an array of coin models. That's why we made the coin models. So in this type, we're going to call array coin model dot self, and the decoder is going to be a JSON decoder open close parentheses, and that's because we know this is JSON data. So if this decoder is successful, it's going to give us an array of coin models, and then finally we can sync that array. And for the completion, let's click enter. We'll call this completion. We will switch on the completion, open the brackets, and we'll do case.finished. If it is finished, that means it's successful. We'll just break. We don't need to do anything with that. If it is case.failure, we'll say let error, colon, and then we'll just print out here the error. So we'll print error.localized description. This is just like a human readable format version of this error. Then finally, if we do receive this value, we have returned coins. So we can call self.allCoins, and we'll set it equal to returned coins. And we know, because we are good coders, that this self is then going to create a strong reference to the class. So if for some reason we needed to deallocate this class, the system actually wouldn't because of this strong reference. So instead, we have to make it weak. We do that with a weak self. And then basically we just need to make this optional with a question mark here. If you're confused what weak self is, I covered it in detail in its own video in the SwiftUI Continued Learning playlist, and I highly recommend going to check that out and then coming on back to this. So if this is all successful, we should then append the return coins to our all coins array, which is up here. Finally, we have this warning message here that the result of this is unused, and that's because this is a subscriber, and because subscribers can be canceled at any time, we need to store them somewhere. So if you've been following my courses, usually I create a var cancelables of type set of any cancelable, and we don't have access to it because we have not yet import combine. Set of any cancelable, and then we open close parentheses, and then on our publisher, we just store into the cancelables. And that works, and that's great. Sorry, there should be an equal sign. And this would work if we ran it. But the problem with this approach is that it is then tough to figure out if you wanted to cancel it later. It's tough to figure out which item in this set is referring to this specific data task publisher. Because if we appended a bunch of different publishers to this cancelable set, we would then need to figure out which one we want to cancel if we ever try to cancel one. So instead of creating a set this time, I'm going to create a single any cancelable variable. So I'm going to call this var coin subscription. And it will be of type any cancelable, and I'll make it optional. So instead of this storing cancellables, we're just going to set coin subscription equal to this publisher. So this way we have our subscription right here, and when we want to cancel it, we can just access this directly. And of course, I'm setting this up because we do want to cancel it. So when we call this data task publisher, it basically just assumes that this URL could potentially be sending us data over time. So when we go to call this, it's assuming that it might publish values now, and then it stays listening in case we have more published values in the future. But we know that this URL is just a simple GET request. So it's going to go to the internet, come back once. It's not going to come back like 5 or 10 times over the course of a minute or something like that. So because it's just one single GET request, if it does come back this one time down here, let's just cancel it after that. So we'll say self.coin subscription and we'll just cancel it. It's not a big deal if we don't cancel it. It's not going to really take up that much memory or really affect our app in any way. But we are being good coders and we might as well cancel it because it's not going to really do anything after it already returns once anyway. All right, so when we initialize a coin data service, it is going to initialize and call get coins. The get coins function is going to get this URL. It's going to get the data from the URL, hopefully check for a valid good response. If we get good data, it's going to try to decode it into coin models. And then if we have an error, it'll print out the error, but otherwise it will append the returned coins to our altcoins array here. So now all we need to do is get this all coins published array into our view model. So I'm going to click the plus on the right side here. And when we're on the right editor, I'm going to open up the home view model. All right, so remember this home view model is the view model for our home screen. The first thing we need to do in here is initialize this coin data service. So we'll say private let, we'll say, we'll call it data service, and we'll set it equal to a new instance of coin data service. So when we initialize this coin data service, which we are doing right here, it is going to call this init and it's going to get the coins automatically. And once it gets the coins, it's going to append them to all coins. And now we just need to get the data from this all coins to this all coins. So from the data service back into our view model. And I labeled them the same way. They're both called all coins. This one in our view model here is going to subscribe to this publisher in our data service. So this way, anytime we append to this array here, because it's a publisher, anything that is subscribed to this publisher would then get updated. So in our view model here, we're going to create a func add subscribers, open close parentheses, open the brackets. And let's get rid of our init here and just call add subscribers in our init. So in this add subscribers, let's subscribe to the data service dot all coins. I'm going to use the one with the money sign here because that is a publisher. So this data service dot all coins is the data service dot all coins here. Okay. So when this gets published, this subscriber is going to also get notified and get the same values. So when we, in our get coins, we're going to append at the bottom here, we're going to append all coins to this. And once we append it at the exact same time that we append to this publisher, it's going to publish that value to this subscriber on the right side here. So all we need to do here is then call .sync. And we're not going to worry about the errors right now. So let's just take the receive value here. And all we need to do is take the published value, which we'll click enter. This will be returned coins. And here we'll just call self.allCoins equals returned coins. And again, we know this creates a strong reference. So just to be safe, we'll add a weak self here. I'll make this optional. And then we're getting that result warning because we haven't stored this subscriber anywhere. So in this home view model, we're not going to cancel these subscribers ever. So we're just going to add them into a set. We'll say, I'll say private var cancelables. And we'll set that equal to a set of any cancelable. And again, we need to import combine any cancelable, and then we'll just store this in the cancelables. All right, so one more time, I know I'm repeating myself, but I know some of you are going to get confused from this because I get so many of these questions. But how this is all working, because this is like the magic of our app, and it's really important to understand this. Our view has a reference to this view model. And this view model then has a data service, which we are initializing a new coin data service right here. And when we initialize this coin data service, which is this class here, in the initializer, it is calling get coins. This get coins function is going to go to our URL. It's going to download the data. It's going to check that it is valid data. It's going to decode that data, and then it's going to take that data and append it to the altcoins array, which we have up here. When things get appended to this array, because it is published, anything subscribed to this publisher will also get notified. And back in our home view model, we added these subscribers. And the first subscriber here is subscribing to the dataservice.allCoins array. This array is this published variable on the right. So when we get data published here, it's going to also publish here because we're subscribing to that data. So anytime we change the all coins, we're going to also get that returned here. And all we're going to do is take it here and then just append it to our all coins array. All right, that was a lot of talking and explanation, but I hope you guys are following along, and let's X out of this. Let's jump into our home view now. We have our home view model, and let's resume it. If we did everything correctly, when we resume this preview, it should actually download some coins. And it was like magic, guys. That was so awesome. I hope you guys now have these coins coming through, and they look like they're all formatted correct for me, and you should be able to scroll on this list. All right, guys, so I hope you are at the same point now. Your screen should be loading all of this data, which is so cool. If for some reason it's not loading this data, I would say check if anything's printing out to your console. Make sure you set up these subscribers correctly. And then if all else fails, maybe check on your CoinModel, because if for some reason you set up the CoinModel wrong, the decoder might fail. But most of this is optional, so it should be a very slim chance of the decoder actually failing. And I hope that at this point in this video, you guys now have this data pulling into your app, and it looks so awesome. All right, guys, so our screen is finally coming together. We do still have a lot more to do to make this a professional app, of course. So that's it for this video. I think this was one of the most exciting ones for me because we finally get to see all this data coming onto the screen. We've been setting this up for a couple videos now. So as always, I'm Nick, this is Swiftful Thinking, and I'll see you in the next video.